few minutes with Chris, who has been our host today. And he is the executive director of the Kenosha County Historical Society. And he's got their archivist with him, Cynthia Nelson. So if you could introduce Cynthia, that would be helpful. They're going to cover some of the most commonly asked questions that we have gotten and they have gotten through Recollection Wisconsin's work and this summer's Digital Readiness Fair series.
Yeah, so thanks for everybody for being here again. Cynthia Nelson has been with the Kenosha County Historical Society going on, I believe it's her 31st year here. And she's been involved with our major digitization projects over the last several years. The Kenosha County Historical Society has been around since 1878. So we're lucky that we have a very large and diverse photographic archive. With that archive, we have undertaken a few digitization projects over the years. So what we did for this short presentation here was really look at the major themes involved with some of the questions that we've received over the last few months. And I will turn it over to Cynthia in just a second here to get started on those themes and how we can approach a digitization project. Kristen, if you want to head to the next couple of slides here. We were lucky to receive a few grants. We partnered with the Kenosha Public Library on these grants and wrote them through IMLS and their library service grants. Cindy will talk about how we decided to choose the collections that we did to do these, but we were able to get a few thousand slides from the C.E. Dewey Lantern collection digitized and online and available for people in our community to learn from. The secondary part of that was that we did not have to handle these slides anymore, so there was a collection care aspect as well. If you head to the next slide, a similar project, and it was done with that same grant that I just mentioned, was the Louis Thiers glass negative collection. So again, very sensitive items that we're dealing with here. And again, over 1,000 glass negative slides that were digitized in that collection. Kristen, just one more slide there. And then a couple years later, we were able to write a second grant with IMLS and partnered with the Kenosha Public Library again. And this one was more focused on the subject matter. Kenosha had just a ton of industries here over the years. And people were constantly coming to the society and asking about these industries and what photos we had. So with this digitization effort, we were able to digitize over 1,600 photographs and included some textual materials as well. And all of those grants are available through our website. It's hosted by the University of Wisconsin as well. So they all include not only the photograph, but a lot of information to go along with that. And it's been tremendous to have access to that. A recent effort of our Historical Society is to digitize some films that we've had in our archives for over 20 years. And we've recently partnered with a filmmaker to do that. So we're working on digitizing over 600 videotapes right now and making those accessible. Next slide, please. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Cynthia, and she's going to speak a little bit about how we evaluated these projects and got them off the ground and started.
Good afternoon. When I first came into these projects, we were approached by our local Kenosha Public Library. They had resources that were not allowed to be checked out. You'd be familiar with quite a few of them, like city directories. They also had telephone directories, but they also had individual books and materials that they had a great fear of losing. So they approached us and said, you know, we don't have that much to fulfill the numbers for a grant. And what do you have? And we said, well, we do know we had this glass slide collection that I mentioned earlier was made into a book project. So we decided, yes, we do know of something that does have an index already, and it is fragile because of the book being published. Everybody wanted access to all these glass large glass slide, glass negatives, and we knew that they could not have access to them, come in and look at a glass slide on a light table. So we had told them, yes, we would love to get involved with this project. And they were going to be the people who were going to write the grant. They were going to worry about getting staff to do the metadata for it. So what I had to do was identify a collection. So for any of you wanting to know how to get started on a project, that's how our first project started, was an evaluation. What do we want to digitize? And we had started this project, but it wasn't going anywhere after this book. So I was looking at it due to conditions or accessibility. Those were our priorities for this first project that we did, was this Lewis Tiers glass slide collection. But for you would be to, what do you have? What are you avoiding? A lot of archives and institutions are avoiding something because they know it's something we should do something with, but we don't know how to handle it or how are we going to do this. And that is what I always suggest before you ever think of a software or volunteer time, is what do you have in your collections that should be. Determining the scope would be, is it part of a collection? Do you have a large photographic collection? Do you have original film, family film, professionally done film? An example of something like that is, Chris had mentioned our video collection, but also for our community, American Motors had their own station within the corporation that they had video done. So it was like having their own corporate TV station within it. So the thing would be to determine your scope and what part of your collection do you want to cover. Other parts of your collections, do you need to do the whole collection? You do individual part. Prioritize what is more significant to your institution or to your community and what is less significant. For us, it was, they had these collections and they had sat on them for years. One was definitely from the 1930s for the centennial of our community. Another thing would be, at one time, our historical society thought industrial history was not significant. And when I came, they had very little. So it was, we want to gather an industrial collection and make sure we preserve it. And then the thing would be is how big are your collections? How many objects, which could be your book formats, your magazine formats, your photographs, your audio visual, it could be all the different versions of medias, or it could be old versions that you have transcribed in a new thing, but it isn't new any longer and it's not accessible to you or to your public that wants access to it. Next slide. Now, to access equipment and materials, we went through many ways and we're still thinking about what kind of digitization tools do you need? For us initially was, of course, a computer, a scanner. We've struggled with questions about scanners because when you have to think of scanners are also computers, you have outside drives, you use laptops because they can go off-site if you need to have them off-site. How many of your volunteers have access to your computer when you're doing these projects? Scanners, think about it. I've heard people speak this afternoon of newspapers. Clippings are easier to scan. They may be in sections, but we have full-bound newspapers, full-size newspapers that are bound. We cannot afford a scanner that would be big enough to do those projects. And that was one of the first projects that had come up with us, and we still haven't done that. And it doesn't look like we would do that. You would get an outside group like newspapers.com to come in and scan material. For us, it would be, if you're going to have somebody come in and shoot things with a digital camera, would be, do you own a digital camera? Do you have a quality that you can use? With us, we needed light boards to be able to sort through our glass materials that we use, slides, negatives, but also for us, our big problem with our audio visual was we had so many different types of audiovisual material. We knew we couldn't do it, and that's how we got this man who was a documentary filmmaker to come in and do that for us. Storage. I know people had spoken before. Storage is an issue. Storage is definitely an issue for our institution. So when we were able to digitize our glass slides and our glass negatives, we are now able to store them in an appropriate facility off-site. That is a museum that has allowed us to move our things out of our very crowded archives into a different space. So those are also things. Also, all the different methods that you can store, such as University of Wisconsin, storing things, also having things put on gold archival DVDs, also cloud. So think of all the ways that things can be stored, or digital materials can be stored, and having multiple copies of that. Physical storage of analog collections, everybody, I'm assuming, is always looking for boxes, always looking for folders. Cabinets, Chris was actually able to go to get us cabinets for our materials. With the Habitat Restore, we found those outrageously expensive, oversized cabinets for big materials at Habitat Restore. Next slide.
So then for funding a project, if you could mute on the bottom left. Funding a project, this is a question that's asked by everybody, and it's always an issue. But for us, we've had experience with writing grants, of course. Wisconsin Humanities offers grants for various projects. We heard Kristen Luffelman speak about the mini grant series through Wisconsin Historical Society. There's other options to just funders and grants as well. We are also looking for organizations that may overlap a certain collection and have interest in that collection, and going out and finding a sponsorship for that, so that they can get materials online and accessible for their communities. An example of that would be, we have a great UAW, a union workers collection here that we could approach the union about, and possibly they would be interested in funding that. There's just a lot of different avenues to think about when funding. And I think the most important thing is to find people that are interested in the subject matter that you're dealing with, and pitch it to them that, look, we're able to make these things accessible for more people to learn from. If we can go to the next slide, please. We'll try to wrap this up pretty quickly. Staff and time is something that has always been brought up as a concern, and it is a big concern. As a manager of our staff here at our institution, it's something that we realize that we will have to devote time to. But in the long run, most likely these projects will save time for your organization. I think it's important to make that case to organizational leadership, whether that's your director or your board, that these are projects that will preserve the collection. We will not have to handle them as often, and it'll actually save time in collection care. It will create interest for the institution. When we did these digitization efforts, there's a whole community out there that learned about the Kenosha County Historical Society and what we do, and that drives funding as well. You can get donations with that. You can get both monetary and archival donations. So I think it's one of those things that you make the pitch to your organization and say, this is definitely worth doing. And then, one thing that we've always looked at is having a clear leader for each project, so that they're responsible for the results. They can oversee volunteers and staff, and then also oversee training. And if we can head to the last slide, I'll wrap up shortly here. A place to look for additional staff and time. Obviously, most of the organizations that have tuned into some of these fairs over the course of the last couple of months are smaller institutions with limited resources, and even large institutions have limited resources a lot of times. We've had great success partnering with local high schools for volunteer hours to sign off on. We're lucky here in Kenosha that we have a few colleges and universities with history departments that we've reached out to, and have had really successful internships here. There's senior groups in most communities that you can reach out to, and seniors will get involved in the archives with various projects that can help spur digitization or help out along digitization projects. And then again, special interest parties. If we have a women's collection that we are looking at in digitizing, or a fraternal collection, we would reach out to those organizations and see if they would be willing to provide different volunteers to help with that effort as well. And then as far as technical support, we've had a lot of luck and help from libraries, other museums in our area, obviously our community of practice here that we're working on developing through Recollection Wisconsin Historical Society. And then we have a independent media channel here, Kenosha Community Media Channel 14, that we're working on partnering with oral history. So Jay Highland had mentioned how, videographers and that sort of thing. There's a whole volunteer organization here already in Kenosha and many communities that they have the training to do that and conduct those oral history projects. So again, we just wanted to hit on a few of the major themes that come up on the questions. Thanks for bearing with me. We've been a little bit over our time slot, but I think it's valuable to look into it. And if anybody has any questions, feel free to reach out to our organization as well.
Thank you, Chris. And it's okay, we had planned for, we built in some wiggle room, so you're totally fine. But thank you, that was fantastic